Hey everybody, Brendan here. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be covering round 2 from the Mississauga Summer Under 2100 Open, or just the Under 2100. I guess it's not really an open section if it's under 2100. It's open to join the tournament, but it's for under. Anyways, you get the point. So I am playing black against Andy. I lost my first game, and that one was pretty depressing. I was playing speedy, I was playing silly, playing stupid, and I was experimenting with d4, and it just did not work out. So now I am playing with the black pieces, and let's hope that we can get a better position than last time. So e4, and I was already happy because, yay, we get a Sicilian. Knight f3, d6, d4, trade, knight f6, knight c3, and knight c6. So we get into my lovely classical Sicilian. And one may know that bishop g5 is kind of the main move here, the most testing try. But my opponent played bishop e3, which has some problems with it, mainly with knight g4. Because after knight g4, well, I think maybe complications with bishop g5 are probably the best way to go. My opponent played bishop to c1. This is just kind of an admission of guilt, and now I can start going on the offensive. If I really wanted to, I could play knight f6, but there's absolutely no point here. After queen to b6 here, there's already tactical threats, which makes black's life pretty happy, and black's already considered to be at least slightly better, maybe even just better. Bishop to b5 was played, which is the best try here, but e5 is the big response, and this is the problem, because although I can't take on d4 here, one thing to note is takes on d4 would be a huge blunder, because the pin on the knight prevents me from taking that knight. And right now I'm threatening e5. And that's obviously what I played, because if they move the knight, then f2 hangs, and that's just checkmate. So they didn't do that. Instead, in this position, we saw the move knight to d5 to attack my queen. Unfortunately, this just leads to a not so great position for white, where black's going to get two pieces for the rook, and this is plenty worth it here. So queen takes d4. Queen takes d4, they have to take first because f2 is hanging. E takes d4, plus even if f2 wasn't hanging with mate, there would be some queen takes d1, so like let's just pretend there's no mate here. There's also still problems anyways because of knight takes f2. But of course mate, so that's bigger than that. E takes d4, knight c7 check, king d8, knight takes a8. The biggest problem is, although we are currently in exchange down here, doesn't matter because this knight will be trapped, and it's a little tricky to trap it, but it is possible. So I played bishop e6, just playing a quick move because I was playing quick in this time of my chess, which definitely ran me into some problems later on, as we'll see in future tournaments. So yeah, bishop e6 was played, bishop to d2. And when I saw this move, I started calculating a lot more, because I was thinking like, oh my gosh, what am I allowing? There might be some like bishop a5 check if I go king d7, or like there might be just like some sort of like knight b6 or something. It feels like something's gonna go wrong. But luckily I was okay, because I started calculating a little bit, and I found this variation, king d7, allowing bishop a5. The idea is if they can get knight c7 and then knight to d5, they're perfectly fine. Or maybe even takes and then knight c7. But there's this surprising move, bishop to e7, and turns out black is still winning the piece. Not because we're attacking it on a8. Yes, we are. We're threatening to take on a8 right now. But there's another threat. And that is, if they go knight c7, now we have bishop d8. Which is pretty surprising. Just creating a pin, and the knight is going to be taken next move. So luckily, we actually win a piece. Either the knight or the bishop. Preferably, we'd get the bishop, but beggars can't be choosers in these types of situations. So knight b6 was played, trying to get at least a pawn out of the situation, which is definitely the best way to go. But this should probably be winning at this point anyways for black. So I played bishop f6 to defend my pawn a little bit further. Rook d1, rook a8, just to attack the a pawn. I wasn't really interested in taking it. Bishop takes a2 because you can run into problems with like b3 and like sure we can like babysit the pawn or the bishop, but this isn't really the most active way to play it, and it feels like some mistakes could happen, and that's something I wanted to avoid, just because it's not getting out anytime soon. White might castle, and then, yeah, they're just going to leave it there and just make sure no bishop b1 stuff is possible. So it's still maybe fine. There's no reason to allow it, though. Absolutely none. So I played rook a8, threatening rook a2. They, of course, did not want that to happen. They played a3. And then I played king e7. So I played king e7 to get out of the pin. Now they can't take on d4. And if they want to, they have to trade off more pieces in a position where I think that helps me. Most importantly, they have to get rid of their bishop pair in order to do so. So bishop takes c6, takes, bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, and now c5. And I was very happy to get this move in because it actually kind of just paralyzes the side of the board. And there's ideas of, for example, a move like c4. So rook d2 was played. And I was thinking of c4, for example, here. c4 is very interesting as well. There's not really as much of a point to it, though. The big idea here is maybe we're threatening c3. That would also be totally fine for us. But most importantly, we're threatening moves like rook b8, where b3 or b4 is harder to play because the pawn on c4, we can always en passant or just take on b3. And if we get into a position where it's just like these pawns liquidate on the queen side somehow, and it's just like the two pieces versus the rook, then we're just going to easily win. This should be winning already, but of course that would make it easier. But I played knight e5, and the idea of knight e5 is that I'm threatening knight c4, for example, right now, and b2 would fall. They played c3 to defend the pawn. I thought like b3 made more sense, but the problem is rook takes a3 is a huge problem, so they can't really do that. And that's kind of the big intention of knight e5, is taking advantage of the fact that b3 can't be played yet. So c3, and I played knight c4, which I think is fine. I also like the move bishop b3 with the idea of knight c4, and just kind of taking advantage of the fact that nothing can move over here. I thought that was a little interesting, but a little bit unnecessary as well. I just went with knight c4, which I thought was totally fine. Rook c2, rook b8, attacking again. And unfortunately, they can't play anything like b4 because a3 is hanging in all those lines, so that's a huge problem. King to e2 was played, and I took on b2, which I think is kind of just a... It's not a mistake, but it's definitely not the best approach here. Instead, I was also looking at rook b3, which I thought was quite tempting. And the idea here is rook b1 is not ever possible because we can always take on a3, winning an exchange. And if we win an exchange in these types of positions, it's totally winning. There's also possibilities of f5. But the idea here is to be a bit more slow with things. Just build up slower. And we can start bringing our king over to the king side here, and then we take on b2. So that's a pretty big idea here. And also, not just that, but we're now threatening knight takes b2, which is a little bit stronger. So let's just say rook hc1, knight takes b2. The problem is there's not really ever rook b1, because now we have knight a4. And if they ever trade, we're not scared here at all, because they don't even have rook b2. And if they went rook c1 going for rook b1 stuff, then we at least have c4. This construction is actually very, very comfortable for us at the very least. I don't really see too many problems happening. I would be a little bit scared to cut my bishop out of the game, so maybe I wouldn't immediately play that. I'd be more tempted to just bring my king up, because of course rook b1 can also be met with knight c3 right now, which is a problem. But okay, anyways, I took with the rook on b2 immediately, and this kind of spells trouble because they get some activity on the 7th rank here. I ended up playing knight c4, which is not really correct here. Knight a4 is just better because we want to prevent this a-pawn from really pushing down the board. Line can go rook b7, king d8, king d3, because c3 was hanging. King c8, rook a7, knight b6, a4, king b8, rook e7, and now d5 breaking through. And the idea is if takes, now we can take with the knight and we can start bringing our king in. If we ever win this pawn, the game's just over. But when we think about it, why are we getting into a variation where we're kind of just fighting to get out of any problems here when we could have had more active options earlier? So that kind of doesn't feel right. So I played knight c4, and they ended up playing a4, which gave me the chance to run my king over to the queen side and not be on the back rank. So if they go rook b7, now I don't have to worry as much because I have king c6. So I was pretty happy about that. They go f4 instead, trying to trap in the bishop here. But I can just go king c7 because if they go f5, which they did, then I just go bishop d7. And this structure is totally fine for me because there's not really any breaks that they can ever make. So I don't really have to be worried about their activity with their rook. Plus everything is covered on the b file now, so there's not really any chances there either. So that is nice. They played rook a1 because the a-pawn's hanging and there's not another way to defend it. But the problem is after rook a1, I have a way to win material here. So there is an interesting combination of moves that I can make that just kind of solidify that this is definitely going to be winning. So I'll give you guys some time for that. The move is bishop c6. This might seem obvious, and it kind of is, but well, we have to be maybe potentially a little worried of some sort of like a pawn movement. The truth is we don't really actually have to be. There's always bishop a8, a7, and then like knight b6, and we can always like go like knight c8 and take the pawn eventually. So winning the a-pawn, and well, that's a big deal. We could have maybe also taken g2, but there's no point in allowing rook g1 counterplay. So instead here, after bishop c6, there's another move we have to look at, king d3, which attacks our knight and also defends the pawn. But this doesn't actually work because now we have knight b2 check, which wins a4. King e3, knight takes a4, they played c4. I ended up playing knight c3, allowing rook a7 check, bishop b7, and then after king to d3, I just double checked my variations here, making sure everything's okay, and well, after I did, black to move and win. So I'll give you a few seconds here to pause the video if you'd like to calculate it. The move's knight takes e4, so we have to calculate rook takes b7, which is what was played in the game. King takes b7, king takes e4, king c6, very important move, because if they get to d5, then that is a little annoying. I think we're actually still okay, but there's no reason to allow it. g4, f6, h4, h6, and h5. Now this looks like a draw, because if we move our king, then this feels like a draw, because, well, we can't really make progress here, except we can here, funnily enough, we can make progress. So they don't really have a choice, but there's just a cleaner move, which is d5 check, which is what I ended up playing. C takes d5 check, king d6, and now they're in zugzwang. They have to move away. We're just up a pawn. And after g5 in this position, I took with the h-pawn. I think they were going for one last trick here, which is to, if I took here, then, you know, maybe they try to get in somehow. This is just totally not working. It's way too slow, but I understand why they did it. Worth a shot. But here after queen c7 check, we can call it a game, as this would be totally winning. So yeah, I took with the h-pawn and my opponent ended up resigning. This was a little bit more interesting to me because I felt like I just wasn't really playing that great, despite having a pretty good opening. Like, everything was great in the opening. I got what is practically, not even practically, it is a winning position. as long as I play it right. And I found ways to make it harder for myself, which is very unfortunate. But at the same time, I still ended up winning, which is important. And I feel like there was very few practical chances for them besides the rook b1 b7 that I can kind of give myself some credit at the very least, but not a game that I'm necessarily happy about. And that's about it. I guess the big thing is, again, these bishop e3s I'm very happy to see, because knight g4 just causes problems for white in these lines. And that's kind of one of the nice things about playing the classical instead of Najdorf, because if you play a6 here, then all of a sudden you see bishop e3 and you're like, oh no, one of the best variations against the Najdorf, what do I do? But again, knight c6, bishop e3, it's not the same thing. A lot of people end up playing bishop e3 thinking, oh, it's pretty similar to a Najdorf, I can just play this move, but then they run into knight g4 and queen b6. So anyways, that's going to cover it. I will see you guys in round number 3. Have a good one. Bye-bye.